Housing prices in Canada continue to rise, and Barrie is no exception. According to the Barrie and District Association of Realtors, BDAR, the average price of a home in Simcoe County last month was $770,000. It is 30% higher than the prices in July last year. And the interesting part is that there was a year-over-year decline in the number of units sold. So the prices are going up even though the number of houses sold went down. But that could be because of the reduced inventory or people unable to afford a house. When the pandemic started, everyone was expecting prices to go down and even crash. Instead, prices went through the roof. So how did we get here? What is to expect in the near future? And is there a way out of this crisis? Professor Mike Moffatt, in his presentation, tried to address these questions. Moffatt is a senior director of policy at the Smart Prosperity Institute and assistant professor at the Ivy Business School at Western University. In the past, he worked as a Chief Innovation Fellow for the Government of Canada, where he advised deputy ministers on innovation policy and emerging trends. Moffatt divided his presentation into three parts. First, how Ontario is growing. Second, lack of supply and migration from Greater Toronto to cities like Barrie. And third, what is the next we should expect in the housing market and how to resolve these issues?
So the first issue is the growing province. If we look over the last 5 years, you can see on the sort of far right of your screen, we've grown by almost 1 million people in Ontario the last 5 years. It actually would have been over 1 million people absent the pandemic. Prior to this, we were growing at about 700,000 people every 5 years, so about 140,000 people a year. So what the heck happened? Well, what happened was some policy changes that go back to the Harper government and accelerated under the Trudeau government. Basically, international students who come to Ontario often stay under the postgraduate work permit program and then gain permanent residency in the province. And that's shown by this big green rectangle in 2016 to 2021. You'll notice is much larger than in previous years. So that's basically what's happened. We've had an influx of a lot of really talented, ambitious 20-somethings, which is fantastic for the province. We just need to figure out how to get the supporting housing and infrastructure in place if we want to continue to attract and retain this talent. So we've seen, because of this increase in population, an increase in this concept of drive until you qualify, of people in the Toronto area, the GTA, going, I can't afford to continue living here if I want to raise a family. So they get in the car and they go to a nice, family-friendly, climate-friendly community. So if we look at, this is data from Toronto and Peel region. So it used to be every single year on net, about 20 to 25,000 people would leave Toronto and Peel for other parts of the province. It's now, in the last year we have data, and this goes right up to the beginning of the pandemic, so it's not driven by the pandemic. In the last year we have data, we have 60,000 people on net leaving the city of Toronto and Peel region for other parts of the province. So, and what's happening is that this is causing the housing shortages and high housing prices to be transmitted across the province. So 5 or 6 years ago, these families were moving to Oshawa, they were moving to Milton. Now they're moving to Barrie, they're moving to Kitchener-Waterloo, they're moving to Woodstock. So it's causing these high housing prices to be transmitted across the province. So the big question is, okay, what does this mean going forward? What does this mean going forward across the region? So if we look across Ontario, so the last 5 years are on the far left, the Ontario Ministry of Finance says, you know what, we've had enough difficulty trying to figure out how to house 1 million new people every 5 years. Ontario Ministry of Finance says, get used to it. That over the next 5 years, as the international students come back, we're looking at about 1.25 million. And we're essentially looking at household demand over the next 10 years of 1 million net new homes across Ontario. We have never, or at least not in my lifetime, and I've got a lot of gray hair, we've never built 1 million net new homes in a 10-year period. So this is the challenge that we're just not looking at how do we build enough homes, but how do we build enough family friendly, climate friendly, walkable communities and so on? How do we avoid issues of sprawl and excess commuting and that kind of thing when there's so much residual household demand? So my final thoughts are that Ontario's population boom, what we've seen over the last 5 years, it's only going to increase. Again, according to the Ministry of Finance, as you know, your big growth destination for drive until you qualify families. All of this demand is getting driven by young families, and we need to economically we need to make sure that we have the housing available. We're doing a great job attracting talent to the province. Can we retain that? Can we retain that talent? Can we ensure that there's a home, an affordable, attainable home for everyone? And are municipalities prepared for not just the housing demand, but the demands on transit, the demands on parks, schools, amenities, what have you? So that's it. That's, this is not a lot of solutions here, but my view is, the first step is always to admit you have an issue or have a problem. So we're hoping that by putting this data out there, we can get municipalities and the provincial government thinking through, okay, how can we manage this growth in a family friendly, climate friendly way?
Following the presentation, there were some questions and answers. Councillor Morales, who invited Dr. Moffatt, asked what can be done in the short term to address the housing shortage.
Yeah, it's tough. And we specifically don't get into sort of policy recommendations. And it's, there are things you can do on the margins, secondary suites, things like that. But I think, this problem or this issue uh, didn't happen in a day, and we're not going to solve it in a day. So I think a lot of what's going to happen is going to be the advocacy of municipal politicians to the provincial government and saying, hey, we need to do something on student housing. We need to do something on zoning. We need to be able to do something for building medium and high density on transit lines. So it's a tough thing, and we need to, there are things that we can do and the federal government can do about foreign investors and things like that. But we also have to recognize that while, that might affect things on the house, that there is a supply side issue. I think we're getting there. I think we're starting to see the federal parties admit there's a supply side issue in the way that they weren't in 2019. But that's just it, just recognizing, just being able to say, like, look, we've got to build more houses. Yes, we can do things about speculation and things like that, but none of that is going to help. So, please help us here. But yeah, at the local level, again, things like secondary suites. And I really, I don't want to get.
Councillor Kungal raised an issue about balancing growing demand for housing with the environment. Moffatt recommended a high density housing as a solution by finding the right balance between building semi-detached and detached homes and medium-sized residential buildings.
We're losing 175 acres of the best farmland in the world every single day to development. That's going to continue to be an issue if we don't address it.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. But I look at the city of Barrie, we're in the drafting of our next official plan, and we've got growth targets based on population projections. And part of, when I hear, the things that we're seeing and the changes around patterns of where people are moving and migrating to and the impact we're seeing in Barrie, do we need to rethink how we're setting our growth targets?
Well, I do think we do need to have a larger conversation about where are people going to live, what communities, so on. I think we've been looking at it for a lot of communities outside of the greater Golden Horseshoe area, which don't sort of fall into the official plan. But I do think this is going to involve sort of provincial leadership of saying, okay, like what should everybody's targets be? Because if these things are decided at just a municipal level, what happens is that essentially nobody builds house. You just get this sort of excess demand where Barrie's not building enough, or Kitchener-Waterloo or Hamilton or Burlington or whoever. Luckily, they're listening. So we had a meeting on Friday with Minister Steve Clark and Minister Stan Cho, where we presented this data.
What are those impact factors? Are you seeing them, or are there considerations you're hearing about around the less affordable opportunities for seniors who might require in later years? more access to services, not actually being able to maintain residency in an urban core, where they might be more likely to kind of receive a hub of health services and later life services. So,
because you're absolutely right that there is this displacement going on where you're seeing, you're seeing an inflow into a city from a higher price city, but then an outflow of the population to a lower price city. And we're seeing it.
Councillor Jim Harris asked if there was a reason for the increase in international student population.
Yeah, so we are getting more students now. The combination of policy changes that were made at the federal government, plus things like the election of President Trump that were essentially out of our control, but colleges and universities saw that as an opportunity to increase enrollments and be able to keep people like me on payroll.
And the final question was from Mayor Lehman. He wanted to know if young people would want to buy the middle density houses. Professor Moffatt said at present they don't have any choice other than buying whatever limited supply the market has, but stressed the need to build more 3 and 4 bedroom places. That was the second part of Monday meeting. See you next week. Thank you.